You're listening to the Perth Property Show, Australia's only weekly property podcast by West Australian experts for West Australian listeners. Catch your latest episode every Monday at 7 a.m.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Perth Property Show. My name's Trent Fleskins, your host. As always, we are talking the regional markets this week. We've got our main man, Brendon Ptolomey, back in the studio. Brendo, thanks for coming in.
Trent, nice to be here. Thanks for having me back.
Regional markets, we like to go anti-clockwise for some reason. Let's start with Mandurah.
Yeah.
I know it's actually metro, but if we can go past around the cut there, any idea as to how the lovely city of Peel is going?
Yeah, well, interestingly, in our stats that we kept with our clients, all of them, as in the large banks, consider Mandurah to be regional. There you go.
There you go. Great. So we're on point.
It's slowly regaining a foothold across a number of price points, so lower end up to the higher end. Certainly some lifestyle properties are probably past the peak in terms of activity of people getting in there in the frenzy and buying up those canal-type lots, but still the hangover of the post-COVID period of everyone wanting to own their own holiday home at that end of the market is still around. People are still around looking at things, and then you've still got vendors going, oh, gee, I should have probably sold back then. Actually, well, I'll bring it to the market now. So that activity is good. Lower end actually has some growth in it.
Good.
Which is fantastic.
Because it did get absolutely smashed a decade ago and hasn't really come back until now.
Yeah, exactly. And then my caution, as usual, would be that's great that activity is there and values are growing again, but what is the local economy activity happening down there? Has that been renovated? Are there more reasons for people to want to live and therefore in Mandurah, i.e. do they have a job there that's local? Yeah.
And your thoughts?
Oh, look, it hasn't been long-term solved. Yeah, I think there's probably just more activity because of an improved economy in there, and it probably still needs a better longer-term industry-type solution to employment.
So you don't think that lifestyle outcomes in a similar way that Gold Coast, for example, I know Gold Coast got more tourism about it.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the answer for Mandurah, but you don't think simply lifestyle is enough to keep a market running?
No, I don't think so. That tourism side of things will probably help it along a bit, but I just can't see that being longer term at this point in time. Get the lifestyle opportunity, and I think it's fantastic. You've got some amazing beaches and waterways down there. Yeah. It's a great part of the world, but I just don't think they've solved that town centre lifestyle enough to make it that longer term attraction.
Question with that notice, Wolfdean, which is a Melbourne developer, bought the South Yunderup land off of Satterley a couple of years ago, and they've been bringing that to market. And that seems to have been going all right. And it's a place that obviously sits in between Mandurah and Pinjarra. And I got to ask, why would people be moving into those sort of locations? Yeah,
well, traditionally it has still been that lifestyle plus the affordability bit. So want to get a little bit further out of Mandurah, want to be closer to that South Yunderup sleepy lifestyle holiday type location, but don't want to be too far from other bits and pieces like kind of Ravenswood and Pinjarra. So
local buyers, obviously?
Yeah, I think so most of the time. The odd Perth buyer going, yep, I've found the place that I can afford to be at and still be on the water and have the tinny out and those kinds of things. And Pinjarra does, in terms of what it used to be to what it is now, it's looking like a really modern, vibrant town.
Well, there are long-term subdivision plans for Pinjarra.
Yeah.
You think about what the Shire of Murray's looking at out there, they have plans to make this a much larger suburb. Yeah.
And it is one of those ones where I think you wake up in the future and kind of look back at it and go, oh, they had a really good plan and it came to fruition. So, yeah, there's definitely opportunity there. Yeah.
Let's get to Bunbury.
Yeah, so Bunbury market's still really busy. We're doing a lot of valuation activity through there in terms of...
Is it refinance or is it buying?
So a lot of refinance stuff and a bit of buying. So it's not dissimilar to a first and second home buyer market based around Perth Metro, where people have seen their values go up and so they're looking for that deal in terms of finance deal, or looking for their next opportunity, maybe build a second house, i.e. move out of the first home into the second one, those types of things. I'm relatively surprised about how much volume of finance work is through Bunbury at this point in time.
Because I don't think there's a huge amount of land development going out there or anything. There's obviously not a lot of development on the apartment space either.
No.
So not a lot of new product coming to market.
Yep.
I guess it's just people cycling through.
Yeah, exactly. Just that churn. And then then obviously plenty of press around Bunbury Bypass and those kinds of things.
That's
So
true.
I think commerce down there is getting ready for that and positioning themselves for that into the future as well.
I also know there's some East Coast media that has been looking at Bunbury as an option.
Yeah, so it's interesting when we talk
like a
about
Newcastle-esque.
Yeah, yep. And so if there's some momentum around some of that discussion, I would expect rental yields through Bunbury to look relatively good in terms of capital value to get in isn't as high as it could be in Perth Metro, and rental yields should look relatively solid. Yeah.
Isn't it interesting how the East Coast people, because they have more satellite, large towns on the East Coast, they're nearly less reticent or less prejudiced against buying in somewhere like Bunbury?
Yeah, and so we are so Perth-centric in WA. There's plenty of people that hopefully agree with me there, but I think that our post-COVID opportunity is more around West Australians understanding their state better than they ever have in the past, yeah.
I agree. Let's get down to Busselton, Dunsborough.
Yeah,
Is it still on the boil, or is it simmered off?
Well, when we're talking about is it still on the boil, it was boiling the pot dry. So the activity is now it's not normal. It's still much better than normal. And so we're back to a level that's just a little bit more manageable and a little bit less frenzied. So the dramatic...
So it's a good market.
Yeah, good market. Dramatic value increases are starting to level off. I was having someone tell me this week that lots within the Geograph Bay Marina there have probably gone up by nearly 75% in value, those kinds of numbers.
Since when?
So that's in the last couple of years, yeah. Yep. And as you and I know, that development's had plenty of trouble over a long period of time. There's a new release coming there, which is an indication that the developer's confident that they'll sell more vacant land through there. If you go all the way through those new estates, so out the back of Dunsborough Lakes, plenty of new development coming
Vass.
through there, back into Vass or back up to Vass. There's plenty of activity there in terms of land sales and construction happening at the moment, and people looking at their options in terms of where they live down there. And obviously we're coming off a vacancy rate that was really, really tight.
It's not like there's a huge amount of land available to develop in these areas. Margaret River as well. I've spent some good time mining around trying to find plots that were zoned urban for development that were on a few hectares.
Yep.
Not that many options left, right? It's quite a constrained market in terms of supply.
Yeah, and there's a couple of owners down that way that own
most of them.
large tracts of land that are essentially locked up because they don't want to do anything with it at the minute. Yeah.
Let's move to Denmark.
Yeah, so we're just really interesting, really tight market. It is one of those markets where I've consistently heard stories about people from Perth relocating. So the genuine stories are around, I can now work from home and I'm going to relocate to a regional location. And interestingly, a lot of people have chosen Denmark. Essentially, great town, really vibrant, got a good commercial feel about it.
It's a tiny market though, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a relatively small market. It's been a really tight rental market in terms of being able to just lob into town and rent a house and test it before you maybe put your roots down and buy something. And just that coastline's amazing through there. Plenty of things to do and to investigate and adventure to be had.
Kalgoorlie. We've just seen plans come across that they're looking to build a big workers' accommodation there, right?
Yeah, which
How
is
does that
interesting.
affect a market like Kalgoorlie, which was actually starting to bubble up?
Yeah. So it might have some short-term effect on house prices in terms of investors just looking at going, well, if they're going to build a 500-bed accommodation for workers down the road, that might have an effect on that longer-term housing demand.
I don't know how they do that because they can't get anything built there at the moment because of construction costs and availability of trades.
Yeah, so I would think that the short-term effect will not be seen long-term in terms of we still need demand for family homes in that location. I'm expecting that the demand is good longer term, basically because of what's happening in the mining industry there. So the risk, as always with Cal, is if that goes wrong in terms of processing plants being built or gold mines being expanded, those kinds of things, and copper and lithium and all those things happening up there. If something falters there, and you're talking about world economy here, then they'll be affected. But clearly, if you look at all of the results and the plans and the investment coming from all of those miners, then you would expect it to be positive.
Mate, I've got people knocking on my door looking to get me to invest in gold mines up north of Kalgoorlie. So if they're hitting me, there's clearly a lot of activity going on right now.
Yeah. We're the Strategic Property Group? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Clearly
Strategic
I'm keen on mine. Yeah.
Let's talk about Newman. You've just come back from a fantastic family holiday up there, haven't you, Brendo?
Yeah, I did a lap. This is the trip that instead of being in Italy or something, you're driving through Exmouth, Coral Bay and Karratha.
How many k's did you drive?
Only 4,600.
That's a new pair of tyres.
Certainly on the new car, it certainly racked up the k's, but that's okay. That's why you have these adventures with the kids.
Did you have a good time, Brendon?
I had an amazing time. I'd want to shout out Karratha to everyone. If it's not on your bucket list, put it there. Clearly, the people that have been there, I had a few people tell me before we left that it was one of their best holidays ever, and I now see why.
I agree. It was one of my best as well.
Yeah. It's just an amazing part of the world, and the barrier is obviously it's a long way from everywhere.
Where do you base yourself from? Is it Newman? Is it Tom Price? Is it both?
We went to the eco retreat there, had a fantastic time, stayed in one of those tents, and I reckon that's the place to be because you're closest in terms of daily drive or walk to all of the gorges. Yeah.
You can't afford it though. You're probably in Tom Price, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Tom Price
Which
down
is
the road.
An oasis, a beautiful part of the world.
Yeah. Interesting thing about the eco retreat is they do have a range of different. So they've got just basic tents without amenity, as in shared services and those kinds of things, through to air conditioned tents. So yeah.
Talk about the Newman House.
Yeah, so the amazing, awesome thing about being a valuer and being part of your own business is that your office calls you and texts you when you're down the bottom of a gorge and you think, gee, I've got reception here. And you end up doing jobs in Tom Price and Newman while you're on holiday. So, yeah, Newman was really interesting. I've clearly been going up and down for years there.
Got any anecdotes for us?
Talking to the local plumber who's telling us about the effect that the harshness of the water has on houses in the locality. So everything from a tap fitting and a drain fitting through to just destroying hot water systems and those kinds of things. Essentially because the pipes that bring the water into the town are galvanised pipes that are dropping plenty of nasties into the water. That means that all of the infrastructure of most houses is deteriorating much quicker than it would in, say, an environment like Perth.
You've got to bring that in if you're going to invest in a place like Newman or anywhere up there where you've got high traces of these destructive minerals, which you should be filtering out before you drink anyway. Make sure you factor some of these maintenance costs in, because that's the thing, right? You see 11, 12, 13% yields. Really have to factor in that a lot of that gets eroded by maintenance and insurance.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to mention the insurance, so just be wary of, with a high reward and a high return comes a higher risk. So interestingly, capital values through there, kind of cheap stuff is about 250 grand, and that would be a single residential mid-60s home.
You were talking about stuff going for 100 grand a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
So there's none of that there.
We went on tour with the kids. I drove past a place that I valued at 60 grand. Someone's still living there, a really ordinary house, let's just be really clear. But it's just interesting to see that kind of 250 to 350k price point taking off a bit and relatively healthy rents. Now, we must let everyone know that there is a fair bit of supply there that is effectively boarded up in Newman at the minute because they're ex-mining company or government houses that are surplus to requirements at the minute.
Well, Newman's one of those places where you really have to go there before you buy, I think, because there are very distinct pockets.
And you can do that in conjunction with a trip to Karratha.
I think so. Yeah. Let's move to Geraldton, my favourite part of the world. What's going on?
Massive increase in terms of activity there, some incremental increase in prices, some dramatic increases in prices, and they're the ones that are coming off a really low base. So go back to that conversation around a $100,000 home in Newman. We've seen the equivalent in the bottom of the market in some of the suburbs of Gero where you're at 150, 200, and there's easy 10, 15, 20% growth in those. Let's just remember that percentage growth is not a huge capital growth in terms of value. Yeah.
Okay, so the market is ticking along. There is some froth in that market.
Yeah, and it's still one of those places that I would think is still really affordable. Rents are not as severe as other regional towns. And I think if the projects that come off there in terms of diversifying the economy into the future, there's a really good chance that it becomes a really solid regional town.
What do you know about Exmouth market?
Sold out. There's about 4 or 5 houses on the market in a small market. Probably my headline for Exmouth at the minute is that there's multi-unit residential development just commencing.
Really? Where's this going?
On the marina. I think it's 26-odd townhouse style kind of units being developed in some of that development WA's former subdivision in there.
That sounds like a very expensive exercise.
It'll be very expensive. I've got construction costs up there pegged at about $3,500 a square metre for a single resi house.
That's a luxury apartment in Perth.
Oh, yeah, it is. Yes, it's a very good point. And so it's just interesting. There's more and more building activity happening up there. I think that one of the advantages of a small town like that having the lifestyle that it does is it can attract plenty of tradies. So it's the classic go for a surf in the morning and go and do a day's work, or vice versa, go do a day's work and an afternoon surf, those kinds of things, or get on the water and fish and that type of stuff. So that helps that local economy to have enough supply to create the housing into the future.
Headland.
I saw some stats the other day where that population growth there is definitely not as dramatic as it has been up the road in Karratha. So that would indicate to me that even though there's decent activity and values have gone up, they've gone up because they bottomed out, and I'd be less sure about the longer term opportunity there in Port Hedland in terms of just capital growth as it would be in, say, somewhere like Karratha. Having said all of that and relating it back to the Exmouth question around lifestyle, Port Hedland's really lacking that lifestyle side of things. So that's where it's really struggling to consolidate its population growth, which will lead through to, I would think, house prices and rents levelling off there quicker than other places.
So, but it's clearly had some significant growth, 30, 40% in the last few years, right?
Yeah, and we've seen some, one-bedroom apartments double in value. So they go from 150 grand to 300 grand and the rents double. So,
but what you're saying is for the risk, you're not seeing another 30, 40% definitely happening.
Yeah, I'd expect it to level out. Yeah. We've always got that supply problem though. So exactly what we just talked about with construction costs and what we talked about in terms of southwest of availability of land, that's always going to put some supply pressure on Port Hedland.
I was asked the question by Millsy on 6PR last week because he was up doing a junket up there in Broome.
He was absolutely on tour, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was on tour in Broome, asking how the market's going there. And I have a cursory understanding of what's going on, but what's Brendo, the main man, know about what's going on there?
Yeah, Broome's sold out as well in terms of hotel rooms.
The rent's amazing up there, isn't it?
Yeah, and so in that same segment when Millsy was up there, I happened to hear the Deputy Mayor on with him, and it was just really nice to hear someone really positive about their town. And she was essentially saying that most hotel rooms are sold out, or they have the issue that can't get enough staff members to actually open the whole hotel. So that leads through into the accommodation side of things in terms of housing selling out and rentals being undersupplied.
Why? What's so interesting? COVID's done now. Why are people still flocking in numbers to Broome?
Yeah, so I think that it became undersupplied really quickly in terms of not building during the downturn. Again, construction costs and availability of land has been difficult. And then the uptick in terms of demand of backpackers and travellers from the East Coast and even grey nomads going, you know what, I'm just going to base myself here. And so town ran out of accommodation pretty quickly.
So low base, doesn't take a lot to fill it up.
Yeah, exactly. The other story I got for you about Broome that I hope someone can do something about is the last flight being cancelled in the evening. This has happened more than once. So the last plane out of town gets cancelled because of technical issues. So the airport's not allowed to stay open, it has to close. And all the passengers that are meant to be on that plane, which would be as many as 250 odd people I would have thought on a 737, then have to find somewhere to stay in town. There's no hotel rooms left. And so the airport staff, who must be absolute legends, then help those people to try and find somewhere to stay. So they have connections on things like Facebook pages and community pages where people just put up their hand through the kindness of their heart and say, you can come and...
Just lodging.
I've got a swag and you can
surfing.
sleep in my shed, or you can come and sleep on the lounge.
Moly.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
That's how chronic it is.
Yeah.
They need a workers' camp, something like that.
Sounds like they need, the emergency hall that we open when there's bushfires and floods. They need the community hall open. Yeah.
How is the Starboy Karratha going at the moment?
Probably the best story there. I've probably said this before, but it does really present as that longer term massive regional centre that they're trying to turn it into. The population growth has solidified into that 7,500, 18,000 people now. It got
down to 13 a few years ago.
Yeah. And so the numbers I saw were Port Hedland's sitting more like 14.5, and then Karratha's surged over 17. So they're really good numbers. The infrastructure change, the construction of things like new shopping centres and new estates and new housing, obviously, has just meant that town continues to change, and that the people that move there are sticky. Essentially, they're staying probably longer than they thought they were going to stay there. That creates that ongoing demand. Rents are up and continue to go up. That'll mean that investors are still interested, and then they land back at the same old problem of how do we create more supply? Can we get construction costs down? I don't think so. They're going to be suffering massively from materials issues in terms of using a lot of steel in construction up there. And with those prices longer term looking high, then ironically the town that facilitates the production of energy and iron ore is suffering from the fact that steel is expensive.
Are you suggesting that there's a medium-term view here that it starts to mature into a less of a mining town market?
Yeah, well, interesting if you contrast that with, say, Newman, where you can almost sense the town going a little bit backwards in terms of population and really trying to find its feet for the future. I think Karratha's well past that now, and I think the roots are well and truly down in terms of ready for that growth into the future.
Can it become a Bunbury? Just in terms of the long-term livability, the long-term residential lifestyle, rather than the transient nature of the mining industry.
Yeah, I think it still comes back to probably that next step in a town. So how do you diversify the population a little bit? How do you create enough housing supply at a cost-effective number?
Supply of that housing to allow the population critical mass.
And there's a tipping point there somewhere, and then it gets to the next stage of infrastructure. So, what's the quality of the education facilities? Because that will make families stay longer, essentially. Yeah.
Brendon, sounds like the regions are still bubbling along in most cases.
Yeah.
Appreciate your thoughts there.
Yeah, mate.
And we'll have you in
Great
again.
to talk about this great state.
It's fantastic that we're actually talking about a regional market that is, for the most part, still in a positive situation. And obviously, just like in the metro space, a lot of it's driven by a sufficient amount of demand, but a real issue with supply.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brendon Ptolomey.
Cheers, mate. Thanks, Trent.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Perth Property Show. If you've only just joined the conversation, you can catch up by heading over to our website, perthpropertyshow.com.au, subscribing to the podcast, or joining our Facebook page. Don't forget to tune in next Monday at 7 a.m. for more expert insights, local analysis, and suburb spotlights. Happy hunting!